Single, Dad was hired by a CEO, but what he heard, her daughter, whispered to the bunny, broke him down. Is this Caleb Shaw? Yes, who's calling? This is internal dispatch. We have a high-priority request. The voice was cool, metallic. No greeting, no preamble. A VIP client. Needs a personal driver. Immediately. Address is in your inbox. It's nearly midnight. Exactly. That's why she called. The line went dead. Caleb sat still in the driver's seat for a moment, then shifted into gear. The night air was damp, heavy like a wool coat that refused to dry. Streetlights shimmered through mist, casting long, trembling shadows on the pavement. The road was empty, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. He turned into an upscale neighborhood where every house had its own gate, and every window glowed just faintly enough to suggest life without warmth. The mansion at number 72 stood out white stone walls, wrought iron fencing, tall hedges that seemed more for secrecy than style. No camera, no doorbell, just a woman standing at the front step, still as stone. She looked no older than her mid-30s, but the way she carried herself, spine straight, jaw tight, spoke of someone who had learned long ago how to survive by never showing fear. Tailored black suit, hair tied up in a neat bun. Not a wrinkle in sight. You're the driver I am. I hired you. Yes, ma'am. Where are we going? Not yet. Excuse me. Just drive when I say. No questions. No conversation. Caleb gave a slight nod. He'd heard that tone before in briefing rooms and interrogation cells. The voice of someone who had built a fortress out of control. Then the door opened behind her. A little girl stepped out, maybe 6, maybe younger. Barefoot, her hair slightly tangled. She was clutching a gray stuffed rabbit so tightly its ears hung limp. Caleb instinctively lowered his voice, softened it. Hey there, princess. No answer, no eye contact. Just silence. She doesn't like to be spoken to, the woman said. Not unkindly, just as a fact. Then she bent down. Clara, go inside. Bedtime. The girl turned and walked away without a word. The door closed softly behind her. Too softly, Caleb thought, for a house that big. The kind of silence that didn't come from peace but from practice. He turned to go, but something about the way the girl moved, the stillness, the absence of even a glance, lodged itself in his chest like a dull ache. A child that quiet wasn't just shy. A child that quiet was hiding. Back in the car, Caleb adjusted his mirror, kept the engine running, waiting. 10 minutes later, the woman climbed into the back seat. Same suit, same silence. Drive, she said. Where to just drive? The car pulled away from the curb. They rolled down empty roads past sleeping storefronts and the occasional diner with neon signs buzzing faintly in the fog. A soft instrumental piece played low on the radio strings and piano, slow and sad. Caleb glanced in the rear view. She wasn't asleep, just staring, eyes fixed on the darkness outside as if it held something she was afraid to let go of. Would you like to change the music? No, a pause. And then, in a voice just above a whisper, more to herself than to him. If a child doesn't speak in a house full of light, maybe don't blame the darkness. The sentence hung in the air like smoke from a forgotten fire. Caleb didn't respond, but his grip on the wheel tightened. He hesitated, then said gently, Your daughter? Clara. Don't she cut in sharp but calm. I'm just a driver, I know, but I'm also a father, and I'm her mother. She said, her gaze catching his in the mirror, steady and cold. So don't interfere. The silence returned this time heavier like a closed door with no key. At 1:00 a.m. they pulled into the valet circle of a 5-star hotel. She stepped out without a word. No, thank you. No, good night. Caleb stayed in the car. He looked at the back seat where the girl had sat earlier. Only one thing remained a thread. A single gray thread from the rabbit's ear. He reached back and picked it up, rolled it between his fingers. He had seen blood in combat zones. He'd heard men scream and mothers wail, but something about that single thread left behind by a child too quiet for her own age felt heavier than any battlefield. He didn't know what the story was. Not yet, but he could feel it. Stories like that, they don't start with a scream. They start with silence. And the worst ones, they begin in houses that look perfect from the outside. Caleb returned the following morning. Same house. Same silence. The gate opened automatically when his car approached, and the woman, Evelyn Mercer, stood waiting again, dressed in a crisp navy blazer, this time hairpinned the exact same way as the night before. Nothing about her looked tired or rested. She just was. 7. "It was 0 sharp," she said, checking her watch. "I'm punctual," Caleb replied. Clara was not with her. The little girl didn't appear, didn't peek through curtains, didn't call for her mother. The house behind Evelyn looked still, like someone had turned down the volume on life itself. "I won't need you all day," Evelyn said as she slid into the back seat. "Just 3 meetings. We're stopping by the boardroom on 5th, then the development site downtown, and finally the investor brunch at the Carlton." "Got it," Caleb said. And again, no questions, no conversation, just the road. Evelyn gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The kind of nod you give to someone you expect to follow, not to understand. But as Caleb pulled away from the curb, he couldn't help glancing back toward the upper window. A faint shimmer of light filtered through the curtains. And for a second, barely a second, he thought he saw something. A small face, wide eyes, gone in a blink. He gripped the wheel tighter. Hours passed. Evelyn moved through her meetings like a shadow, always polished, always precise. The kind of woman who could crush an argument with a glance and make a room full of men feel like boys with poor posture. She didn't walk, she arrived. She didn't listen, she assessed. Caleb waited in the car through it all. At 1:20 p.m., she stepped back into the vehicle after the brunch. She looked flawless. Except for one thing, her right sleeve was slightly wet, as if she'd leaned on something, or wiped something away. "Tough meeting?" Caleb asked, careful to keep his tone light. She didn't answer immediately. She stared out the window. Then, softly, almost as if confessing something to no one, he called Clara a prop. Said, "I bring her out when I need sympathy, like she's a marketing strategy." Caleb didn't reply. "I should have thrown my champagne in his face," she muttered. "You didn't?" "No." I just smiled and watched his wine glass tip over on its own. A pause. Then she asked, "Do you have children?" "Mr. Shaw." Caleb blinked. That was the first time she'd used his name. "Yes. A daughter. How old? 7. Does she talk to you?" "She used to. And now?" "She listens. That's her way of talking sometimes." Evelyn looked at him in the mirror just for a moment. Her eyes flickered with something unreadable. "I don't know how to speak her language," she said more to herself than him. "Clara. She looks at me like I'm the moon trying to explain gravity. I feed her, dress her, provide every advantage. But the silence is louder than anything I say." Caleb said nothing, just drove, because some silences aren't waiting to be filled. They're waiting to be understood. That evening, when they returned to the mansion, Evelyn handed him a sealed envelope. Bonus for yesterday. And today. "I like drivers who don't eavesdrop." "I didn't say I don't hear things," Caleb replied with a small smile. "I said I like drivers who don't eavesdrop." She repeated, then walked away. But just as she reached the door, Caleb took a chance. "Ms. Mercer." She turned. "You ever read bedtime stories to Clara?" Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "No. She can read on her own. Advanced for her age." "It's not about the reading," Caleb said. "It's about the listening that happens after the story ends." She didn't respond, just held his gaze for a second too long, then disappeared inside. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about that window, that tiny face, those eyes. He sat at the kitchen table, flipping through an old photo album of Ellie, his daughter, from when she was 6. Back when her mother was still alive. Back when bedtime meant voices and shadows and the warmth of pages turning slowly under a nightlight. He remembered the first time Ellie stopped speaking after the accident. Not because she couldn't, but because something inside her had broken in a way words couldn't reach. It wasn't therapy that brought her back. It was time. It was pancakes made at midnight. It was stories with no endings because she was too scared of endings. It was presence. And Evelyn. She wasn't absent. She was present. But in the way a locked door is present. Visible. Unmoving. Closed. The next morning, Evelyn called again. This time the route was shorter. Just 2 errands. But halfway through the second drive, she asked Caleb to wait outside a pharmacy while she went in. He stayed in the car, glancing up at the mansion's distant outline behind the trees. Then, from the corner of his eye, something moved. In the side mirror, he saw the back gate open. A small figure stepped out. Barefoot, pajamas, holding a gray rabbit by the ears. Clara. She stood for a second, looking around. Then walked toward the edge of the property where a row of stone planters formed a makeshift bench. She sat down, hugged the rabbit. Just sat. No sound, no fidgeting. Caleb got out of the car. Slowly. Quietly. He didn't want to scare her. He walked toward her, stopping a few feet away. "Mind if I sit?" he asked softly. Clara didn't move, but she didn't run either. He sat. A minute passed. 2. Then she spoke. Barely more than a whisper. "Do rabbits get lonely too?" Caleb looked at the fraying stuffed animal in her arms. One ear torn, button eye hanging. "I think they do," he said. "But sometimes they just wait for someone who remembers they're not toys." Clara nodded slowly. "He used to have a name, but I forgot it." "That's okay," Caleb said gently. "You can give him a new one. People change names all the time, even grown-ups." A pause. Then Clara said, "His new name is Safe." Caleb smiled. Not wide, not flashy, but the kind of smile you only give when something inside you softens just a little after being clenched too long. Later, when Evelyn returned and saw Caleb sitting next to Clara, she froze. Clara didn't move, just kept hugging the rabbit. "I told you not to speak to her," Evelyn said, voice low and tight. Caleb stood slowly. "I didn't speak. I listened." And with that, he walked back to the car. But behind him, Clara looked up, and for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled. Just a flicker. But it was enough to know the silence was cracking, and something was beginning to grow. The rain started just after sundown. Not the kind of storm that roars in with thunder and drama. No, this was quieter, persistent. The kind that tapped gently against windows and crept into the cracks of silence left behind by things unsaid. Caleb had just pulled into the long curved driveway of the Mercer estate when he saw Clara again. She was standing at the base of the staircase inside the foyer. Barefoot, her pajama top a size too big sleeves dangling past her wrists. The rabbit safe hung from her arm, one eye still missing. She wasn't looking out the window this time. She was staring at the floor like it had told her something she didn't quite understand. When Evelyn opened the front door, her voice was brisk. "You're early." "You're not," Caleb replied, checking his watch. "I'm on time." She didn't answer, just turned and walked inside. Caleb hesitated. "Is Clara riding with us tonight?" he asked. "No," Evelyn said without turning back. "She's had a difficult day." Caleb's eyes lingered on the girl. She hadn't moved, she wasn't crying, but her stillness, it was sharp, like she was trying not to take up space. "I could take her for ice cream sometime," he offered carefully. "Just to get out of the house." Evelyn turned so sharply he thought he'd crossed a line. "No." "Okay," Caleb nodded. "It's just, sometimes kids talk to strangers in ways they can't with the people who love them." Evelyn's voice was steel. "She doesn't need strangers. She needs order, stability, routine." "But silence isn't stability," Caleb said, soft but firm. It's just the absence of sound. Something flickered in Evelyn's eyes, not anger, not quite, but something bruised. "She's fine," she said. "She's just quiet." "She's not quiet," Caleb replied. "She's hiding." The sentence sat in the space between them like thunder that hadn't yet struck. Evelyn didn't respond. She simply turned, walked to the car, and climbed into the back seat. "Drive," she said. The roads were slick, painted with reflections of neon signs and passing headlights. Caleb drove in silence. He wasn't trying to provoke Evelyn, not really, but something inside him had shifted, like the rain had gotten under his skin too. At the stoplight, she finally spoke. "You think I'm a bad mother." "No," Caleb said, "but you're thinking it. I'm thinking I've seen kids who were afraid to make noise, and they weren't raised in quiet homes. They were raised in places where noise had consequences." Evelyn looked out the window. "You don't know me. I know that when a child says nothing, it's never for nothing." That one hit. Her reflection in the glass was ghost pale. "She's different," she whispered. "Always has been. Too sensitive." She didn't even cry at her first vaccine, just looked up at the doctor like she expected it. Caleb didn't answer. There was nothing to say to that, because children don't expect pain, unless they've seen it before. Later that evening, after Evelyn's meeting, she asked him to drop her off at a gallery downtown. Some charity function. She wouldn't need a return ride, someone else was taking her home. "Take the rest of the night," she said. "Go home." But Caleb didn't. Instead, he waited. Waited until the lights of the gallery dimmed and the guests trickled out into the misty night. Then he circled back to the Mercer estate, parked 2 houses down, and just watched. At 10:34 p.m., a light turned on in the second-floor bedroom, Clara's window. Caleb stepped out of the car, rain soaking his shoulders, and walked up to the iron gate. He didn't ring, just waited. Then, by some strange force of timing or trust or instinct, the front door creaked open. Clara stood there small and unsure, her rabbit tucked under her chin. She didn't speak, she just opened the door wider. He didn't step inside. He knelt on the doorstep, rain pooling around his knees. "Hi," he whispered. She nodded, solemn as a priest. "You okay?" She held up a piece of paper, a drawing. It showed 2 houses. One had a face in the window with a sad mouth. The other had no windows, just a locked door. Between them, a stick-figure girl standing alone in the rain. "No one's inside the house with the locked door?" Caleb asked gently. Clara shook her head, and the girl, Clara pointed to herself. He let out a slow breath. "You're not alone now, Clara." She didn't smile, but she reached into her pocket and pulled out another paper. This one was harder to look at. It was a drawing of a closet. A girl curled inside, and outside a big shape. No face, just shadows and claws and something that looked a little like a mother and a monster all at once. "I'm sorry," Caleb whispered. "You didn't deserve that." Clara looked at him, really looked. Then she asked, "Do closets remember?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" "Because I don't want it to remember me." Caleb swallowed hard. He wanted to hug her, to scoop her up and carry her away. But instead he said what he wished someone had said to his daughter years ago. "Closets don't keep memories, Clara. People do, and the people who care about you, they can help you write better ones." She nodded. Then, very carefully, she took safe the ragged rabbit and placed him into Caleb's hands. "Keep him tonight," she said. "Are you sure he needs a break?" Back in his car, soaked and shaking, Caleb held the rabbit in his lap like it was made of glass. He turned on the defroster, wiped his face, and whispered, "She gave me her shield. Now I need to become her sword." That night, he didn't sleep. He wrote down everything, every word, every drawing, every tremble in her voice. Because truth is fragile, and when a child finally dares to speak, even in pictures, the world needs to be listening. And Caleb Shaw. He was wide awake, The morning sun filtered through a thin curtain of fog, casting soft golden light across Caleb's modest kitchen. His coffee sat untouched on the counter. The rabbit safe rested on the table, patched and stitched. Caleb had worked late into the night with a sewing kit he hadn't used in years, repairing the ripped seam in its side like it was surgery on something sacred. It wasn't just a toy. It was a message. A fragile whisper from a child who had finally dared to speak without using words. Caleb picked up the rabbit gently and turned toward the hallway where a photo of Ellie hung on the wall. Her smile was lopsided in the frame, missing a front tooth, eyes bright like the whole world was just one big surprise waiting to happen. That was before the accident, before the car flipped, before her mother's blood stained the white dress she wore to church that day. For 6 months after the funeral, Ellie didn't say a word. People told Caleb it was normal. She's just grieving, they said. She needs time. But grief has a clock of its own and silence doesn't tick out loud. Back then, Caleb was still in uniform. Still saluting, still giving orders. He tried to discipline his way through the pain-structured days, nutritious meals, bedtime by 8:30. One morning, Ellie drew a picture of a stick figure walking alone beside a long wall. On the wall was written in shaky crayon, "Daddy is here, but not inside." That night, Caleb sat on the floor outside her room for hours, hand resting on the closed door. He didn't say anything, just let her feel him there. It took 57 days for her to speak again, and the first thing she said was, "Do angels cry when no one's watching?" That's when Caleb stopped being a soldier and started learning how to be a father. He looked at the rabbit again. Safe. A ragged patchwork of fear and hope and a little girl's last ounce of trust. He tucked the toy carefully into a cloth bag and walked to his truck. The air was still cool, the world half awake, but Caleb's mind was already running. This wasn't just a sad little girl. This was a silence wrapped in layers. And he'd learned long ago you don't break silence by shouting through it, you wait beside it, until it lets you in. At the Mercer estate, the mood had shifted. Evelyn was tense. She didn't come out to greet him. A housekeeper, someone Caleb had never seen before, opened the door and waved him in. "She's in the library," the woman said. "Not to be disturbed." Caleb nodded. "Where's Clara?" The woman hesitated. "In her room. Mostly." Caleb walked quietly toward the stairs. He passed a glass hallway where paintings hung in golden frames. Every image was clinical landscapes, cityscapes, nothing personal. The house felt like a museum, beautiful, polished, and completely lifeless. He reached Clara's door and paused. There was no sound. He knocked once, gently. Nothing. He opened the door a crack. Clara was sitting on the floor surrounded by books she wasn't reading, just staring at them. Safe wasn't in her arms anymore, of course not. Caleb still had him. She looked up when he entered, then looked away quickly like she'd been caught hoping. "I brought him back," Caleb said softly, holding up the rabbit. Clara didn't move. Caleb stepped forward, kneeled beside her, and placed the toy gently on her lap. "He told me," Caleb whispered, "he missed you. He didn't sleep much. He was worried about the girl who gave him his new name." Still no words. But her fingers clutched the rabbit almost instantly. Caleb sat beside her in silence, not pushing, not filling the space, just there. Then Clara whispered, "Sometimes she cries, but not when I'm hurt, only when I'm quiet too long." Caleb turned to her voice, calm. "Do you think she's scared, like you?" Clara didn't answer. She reached under the rug and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Another drawing. This one showed a figure with long hair standing in front of a mirror, but the reflection wasn't a woman. It was a storm. Lightning for eyes. Fire for a mouth. And behind her, a girl curled in the closet again. Caleb stared at it. "You think your mom turns into someone else when she's scared, don't you?" Clara nodded, slowly, deliberately. Then added, "She says I look too much like someone she can't forget." That afternoon, Caleb made a call. not to the police. Not yet. He dialed the only person he trusted with things like this. Marcus, he said when the line picked up. I need a favor. Quiet off the record. Marcus used to work intelligence with him, sharp, discreet, loyal to the bone. I'm listening, Marcus said. Can you pull files on Evelyn Mercer, any sealed cases, name, changes, psychiatric history gaps in public record? Marcus whistled low. That kind of favor. It's not just for me, Caleb said. There's a kid involved, and she's starting to whisper. Marcus was quiet for a beat. Then, you'll have something by tomorrow. Caleb hung up. He stepped outside onto the back porch. Clara had followed him barefoot again, holding safe like a talisman. She didn't say anything, just stood beside him looking out at the garden where the wind played with fallen leaves. After a long silence, Caleb asked Clara, "If you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be?" She thought for a long time. Then said, somewhere with quiet, "But the safe kind." He nodded slowly. "That's a real place," he said. "I'll find it for you, I promise." She looked up, eyes wide but steady. "Even if she won't let me go," Caleb knelt down, one hand over his heart. "I've been a soldier. I've fought through gates tougher than this, and I've waited outside locked hearts longer than you've been alive. So yes, Clara, even if she tries to stop you, I will find the door." She didn't smile, but for the first time, she reached out and took his hand. Just like that. No sound, no fanfare, just a tiny hand holding on as if she finally believed that someone would hold back. The storm came without warning. At 3:14 a.m., a branch cracked like a gunshot outside the Mercer estate. Wind whipped through the trees. Rain pelted the windows hard enough to make the glass hum. The power flickered once, then steadied, casting the house in a strange half-light. Caleb wasn't home. He'd taken a late-night drive to clear his thoughts, looping around the hills above the city, the place where you could see everything and nothing all at once. When the call came in, it wasn't from Evelyn. It was from the housekeeper. "She fell," the woman said. "Who?" Caleb asked, already turning the wheel. "The girl. Clara. I found her at the bottom of the stairs. She's not speaking." He didn't ask for more. He just drove. 15 minutes later, his boots splashed through the front walkway, the rain soaking through his jacket. The front door was open. Too open. Inside, the house felt wrong. Not chaotic, not loud, just off. As if something had been broken and everyone inside was pretending not to see the cracks. The housekeeper stood by the entryway, wringing her hands. "She's upstairs. I laid her on the guest bed." "Evelyn hasn't come out of her room. She said not to disturb her." Caleb didn't answer. He was already moving. Up the stairs, 2 steps at a time. The guest room was dim, but he could see Clara lying still on top of the blankets. Her hair was damp, knees drawn up toward her chest. Safe the rabbit tucked beneath her chin like a secret. He approached slowly, gently. "Clara," he whispered. She opened her eyes but didn't speak. Her lip was trembling. Her arms had faint red scrapes like she'd slid against the wall. "Did you fall, sweetheart?" he asked, kneeling beside her. She nodded, then shook her head, and then whispered something that made his chest go still. "I was hiding." Caleb's voice softened further. Hiding where Clara reached toward the nightstand and tapped it once with her finger. He frowned, then stood up, pulling open the closet door next to the bed. It was small, half filled with coats. But near the back, wedged into the corner, was a soft blanket folded in a nest. A flashlight, a plastic cup, a tiny stack of cookies in a Ziploc. A hiding place. A planned hiding place. "Clara," he said, turning slowly, "how often do you hide in here?" She looked away, then said barely audible, "Only when the mirror gets too loud." Caleb sat down on the floor, heart pounding. "The mirror." She nodded. "In Mommy's room. She talks to it when she's sad. Or mad. She says it lies. But sometimes it says things back. He stared at her, at the fragile girl wrapped around a rabbit and a truth that was too heavy for her frame. "Did she ever hurt you, Clara?" No, Clara whispered, not with her hands, just with her face. Caleb didn't know how to respond to that, but Clara kept going, like the words were unraveling from a place too long locked. "She calls me the ghost. Says I float through her house like I'm not really there. She says I remind her of someone who ruined everything." A pause. "She says that's why the closet is for me, because even ghosts need somewhere to disappear." Later that morning, Evelyn finally appeared. Hair pristine. Suit perfect. Like the storm had never touched her. "You shouldn't be here," she said flatly. "It was just a fall." Caleb stood between her and the guest room. She wasn't playing. She was hiding. Evelyn's expression didn't change. She's imaginative. Prone to dramatics. You wouldn't understand. "Try me." Evelyn crossed her arms. "You're just the driver." Caleb took a slow step forward. "No, I'm the man who saw her smile for the first time in weeks. I'm the man who knows her rabbit's name. And I'm the man who just found a flashlight and cookies in a closet where she goes when she's scared of you." Evelyn flinched but quickly recovered. "You think I'm a monster." "I think you're drowning," Caleb said softly. "And you've been teaching your daughter how to hold her breath, instead of how to swim." The sentence hung there. Sharp, clean, undeniable. Evelyn's mouth opened, then closed. Her jaw trembled, but no tears came. "She's all I have," she said finally. "Then love her louder than the voices in your head." Evelyn looked away, and for the first time she didn't have a reply. That night, Caleb sat in his truck for a long time. He watched the rain slide down the windshield, catching reflections from the porch lights. He thought of Clara, of the closet, of Evelyn talking to mirrors and calling her daughter a ghost. Then he reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a black notebook. Inside was a name he hadn't written in years. Elena Shaw, his late wife. He turned to the last page blank for so long and wrote, "Today I saw a little girl with your same kind of eyes, the kind that carry storms inside, but she still reached for the light, and I couldn't walk away." He closed the book, tucked it back into the compartment, then turned on the recorder app on his phone. Not to collect evidence. Not yet. Just to remember her voice. Because Clara had finally said something he couldn't unhear. Even ghosts need somewhere to disappear. And Caleb. He was ready to build her a home she didn't have to hide from. No more closets. No more mirrors. Just light. And the long road back to being seen. Sunday morning came with a hush that didn't feel holy. No church bells, no pancakes, just gray skies, a steady drizzle, and the kind of stillness that makes a man listen to the sound of his own breath. Caleb stood in Clara's room, alone. She'd gone with the housekeeper to the market. Evelyn said she needed space. "She'll be fine," she had added as if that was an ending. But Caleb wasn't looking for endings. He was looking for beginnings, and beginnings often hide in places most people don't dare to search. He crouched by the bed, pulled back the comforter, and scanned the floor. Something caught his eye. A small corner of paper peeking out from under the edge of the bed frame, folded, weathered, carefully tucked where no vacuum or curious hand would ever find it. He reached in and pulled it out. There were 2 drawings. The first showed a house, but not the kind in picture books. This one was crooked with windows scribbled out in black crayon. 3 stick figures stood outside a tall one, a small one, and a third with no face. Above them was written in uneven letters, "Don't tell, or she'll take him." Caleb stared at the page. His hand tightened. The second drawing was worse. It was Clara, alone in a box. No doors, no windows. Just her curled up next to a rabbit that had no head. Above it, a single word floated in all caps. "Sorry." He sat back on his heels, breath shallow. These weren't drawings. They were confessions. From a child too scared to speak in daylight who'd whispered her story into crayons instead. He folded the pages, carefully slid them into the inner pocket of his coat, then stood. That's when he noticed something else. On the underside of the bed frame, barely visible, someone had scratched 3 words into the wood with what looked like a pencil or key. I hear her. Later that day, Caleb met Marcus in the parking lot of an abandoned post office just outside town. Marcus, ex-Intel, ex-Truth Hunter, leaned against the hood of his beat-up Jeep, flipping through a thin folder. "You were right to be suspicious," he said. Evelyn Mercer wasn't always Evelyn Mercer. Caleb crossed his arms. How far back does it go? She was born Evelyn Grace Porter. Changed her name legally at 21. No father on record. Mother institutionalized twice. Minor record sealed for psychiatric evaluation. No formal charges, but Marcus held up a photo, a grainy black-and-white scan of a hospital file. A social worker noted signs of emotional dissociation. Repeated trauma, self-harm history. She disappeared from public records for 3 years, then re-emerged as the youngest VP of a hedge fund in San Diego. Caleb flipped through the pages. A younger Evelyn stared back at him, thinner, paler, with hollow eyes and wrists wrapped in bandages. A girl built from broken glass pretending to be bulletproof. She never got treatment, Marcus said quietly. Just success. And that's not the same thing. Caleb nodded slowly. What about Clara's father? Marcus hesitated. That's the other piece. No birth certificate on file, no paternity claim, no court record. But there's one clinic entry that mentions a male visitor only once during Evelyn's pregnancy. No name, just a note. He handed Caleb the last sheet. Written in shaky penmanship, patient refuses to discuss child's conception. States, she's not his, she's mine, entirely mine. Caleb exhaled, the weight settling deeper in his chest. This wasn't just about a child living in fear. It was about a woman haunted by her past, and passing that haunt on like an heirloom. That evening, Evelyn hosted a dinner. Catered, immaculate. White tablecloths, polished silver, crystal glasses that rang like chimes every time someone dared to breathe too loudly. Clara sat quietly, her feet barely brushing the floor, safe tucked between her side and the armrest like a shield. Caleb was invited, strangely. She said it was for show. "You clean up well," Evelyn had said with a forced smile. "And you deflect well," Caleb replied. She tilted her head. "Must we always spar only if you keep pretending silence is the same thing as peace?" No answer. At dinner, Clara didn't speak. She didn't eat either, just pushed food around like it might bite her back. Then Evelyn leaned over and said something that froze the room. "You know, Clara, when I was your age, I didn't get stuffed animals. I got silence. And silence teaches you how to survive." Clara didn't respond, but Caleb did. "You're not supposed to teach a child how to survive you," he said calmly. "You're supposed to make sure she never needs to." Forks stopped. Glasses clinked. A single breath escaped someone's lips. Evelyn's expression didn't change, but her hands curled in her lap, knuckles white. That night, Clara knocked on Caleb's door. He opened it to find her standing there, safe in hand, eyes wide but steady. She held something out, another drawing. This one was different. It showed 2 figures, a small one holding a rabbit and a taller one kneeling beside her. No house, no shadows, just open sky. At the bottom, in big, blocky letters, were 3 words, "He stayed anyway." Caleb dropped to one knee eye level with her. "I'll always stay," he said. "Even when it's hard, even when it hurts. Especially then." Clara blinked. "Do you think Safe believes that Caleb reached out, touched the rabbit gently?" "I think Safe's starting to." She nodded, tucked the drawing into his coat pocket, then turned to go. Before she disappeared down the hall, she whispered something so soft it barely made it across the space between them. "I hear you too." Caleb stood there long after she was gone, hand over his chest, drawing in his pocket, a war in his lungs, because now he had her words. And once a child trusts you with her truth, you protect it like breath, like fire, like life itself. The sky that morning was the color of unspoken things. No sunrise, just a smear of gray across the horizon like the world had forgotten how to glow. Caleb stood at the edge of the Mercer Estate's garden, hands in his coat pockets, watching Clara move between the apple trees. She wasn't playing, not really. She was tracing the same steps over and over, dragging safe by one-arm eyes on the ground as if searching for something only she could see. He didn't call to her, didn't interrupt. Some griefs don't want company. They just need someone to stand close enough not to feel alone. From behind him, a voice broke the silence. "You think I hate her?" Evelyn stood barefoot on the stone steps, arms crossed over a silk robe she hadn't bothered to tie properly. Her hair was undone, falling in loose strands around her face. She looked different. Less CEO, more haunted. Caleb didn't turn. "I don't think you hate her," he said softly. "I think you're afraid of her." She scoffed. "Afraid of a child?" "No," he replied. "Afraid of what she reminds you of." Silence. Then Evelyn walked down the steps slowly, carefully, as if the weight of the robe was heavier than it looked. "Last night," she said, "I sat in front of the mirror for 2 hours, staring, waiting for her face to stop looking like mine." Caleb turned now. "She doesn't look like you." "Yes, she does," Evelyn said, voice brittle. "She has my eyes, my silence, my echoes." She sat on the edge of a garden bench and looked up at him. "Do you know how Clara was born?" Caleb didn't answer. "She wasn't wanted." Evelyn said the words, cutting clean like glass. "She was survival, a consequence, a scar that grew legs." I don't believe that Caleb said, "Not for a second." She laughed once, dry and sharp. "I spent the first 6 months after she was born terrified I would drop her, that I'd feed her too much, or not enough. I Googled, 'How to love your baby,' at 2 in the morning. Caleb's voice was quiet now. "And did it help?" "No," she said, "because love isn't a skill. It's a scar you choose to keep open." He sat beside her. "Not close, just enough. She doesn't need perfect," Caleb said. "She needs real." "I'm not real," Evelyn whispered. "I'm a shell built from resumes and trauma and expensive fabrics. You think you're helping Clara by staying, but what you're really doing is making her see how much she's missing." "No," Caleb said, shaking his head. "What am I missing then?" "Someone who doesn't walk away." Evelyn blinked, and for the first time her voice trembled. "I wasn't always like this, you know. I used to sing. I used to write poetry in margins of textbooks. Before my mother made me scrub blood off the bathroom floor and told me if I cried again she'd make me sleep outside." Caleb's chest tightened. "You were a little girl, Evelyn." "No," she whispered. "I was a warning, and now I'm passing that warning along." He turned toward her steady. "Then stop." Her eyes met his. "Be the one who breaks it. End the inheritance." A long pause. Then Evelyn said something so quiet it nearly broke him. "I don't know how to be gentle." Caleb leaned forward, voice rough around the edges. "Then let someone else show her until you learn." They sat like that for minutes that felt like years, the kind of silence that wasn't cold, just old and aching to be forgiven. Finally, Evelyn stood. Her robe caught the breeze. Her voice steadier now. "I'll be gone for a few days. Business, real or invented, it doesn't matter. She's safer when I'm not here." Caleb rose too. "I'll stay with her. I know," she said. As she turned to leave, Caleb asked Evelyn, "Who did she mean?" "The someone she reminds you of." Evelyn didn't stop walking, but her voice floated back across the stones like a ghost learning how to whisper, "Me." That night, Clara fell asleep on the couch, her head resting in Caleb's lap. A storybook lay open beside her, though they hadn't gotten past page 3. She'd asked him earlier, "Why does the bunny in the book always come back?" Caleb had smiled. Because sometimes what's lost doesn't want to stay gone. Her breathing now was slow, even. Safe was tucked beside her heart, as always. And Caleb. He didn't move, didn't dare, because this tiny weight, this fragile trust was the kind of thing that breaks if you breathe wrong. His phone buzzed once in his pocket. A message from Marcus. Found something else. Evelyn's mother dead in a facility in Arizona. Cause of death self-inflicted. Evelyn was the one who found her. Age 17. I don't think anyone ever came for her after that. Caleb stared at the screen, then looked down at Clara's hand. She stirred just slightly in her sleep, fingers twitching toward his, and he whispered, "But someone came for you." In the dark, he sat there still, the clock ticking softly in the hall. Because the war wasn't over, but the tide had started to turn. Not with noise, not with confrontation, but with presence, with being the one who stays when everyone else has a reason to leave. And tomorrow he'd tell Clara what she already suspected in her bones. That, sometimes, you're not the echo. You're the start of a brand new song. Monday arrived without ceremony. No shift in the wind, no change in the sky. Just the same soft drizzle that had become almost familiar, like the house itself had learned to weep quietly. Caleb stood in his garage, carefully opening a padded black case. Inside, nestled between foam cutouts, was a small bundle of hardware, a micro camera the size of a button, a motion-triggered recording chip, and a modified charger disguised as a child's nightlight. Marcus had delivered it that morning, wordless except for one sentence. "This is for when silence is no longer enough." Caleb held up the last piece, a soft, gray stuffed bunny with a new stitch along its belly. Inside the seam, just behind the cotton heart, the recording device was embedded. It would capture voices, tones, patterns, not just evidence for courts, but proof for truth. Because sometimes people believe files more than they believe children. That evening, when Evelyn left for her business trip, she didn't say goodbye to Clara. She didn't hug her. She simply tapped her phone, barked instructions to the housekeeper, and disappeared into a black town car. Clara stood by the front door for a full minute after it closed. Not moving, not blinking, just waiting. Caleb walked over, crouched beside her. "She didn't forget you," he said gently. Clara turned slowly, eyes wide but unreadable. "She never forgets me," she whispered. "She just remembers that I remind her." He didn't respond right away, just reached into the tote bag beside him and pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper. Safe. The bunny. Repaired. Reborn. But different now. Watching. He handed it over. "She wanted you to have him back," Caleb said. Clara's fingers curled around the soft gray fur. "He looks better." Still the same heart, Caleb smiled. Just a few new stitches. Then she asked, almost too quietly to hear, "Will he protect me?" Caleb didn't blink. "He already is." That night, the house was almost still. Almost. Caleb waited until Clara was asleep. Her soft hand curled around the rabbit like it was a lifeline and slipped out of her room. He returned to his laptop, opened the monitoring app, and synced the audio feed. A waveform danced across the screen, quiet, then sharp. A voice, then two. He hit play. Voice 1, female, brittle, irritated. "How many times do I have to tell you not to hum?" "Humming is for babies, Clara." Clara's voice soft, barely audible. "I didn't mean to." Voice 1 again. "Your meaning doesn't matter. Only your silence does." Click. Sound of something being set down hard. Maybe a glass or a brush. Then footsteps. Door. Then the audio was silent again. Caleb sat there, fists clenched, jaw tight. Not because he was shocked, but because the tone in Evelyn's voice was too familiar. He'd heard it before. In boot camps, in interrogation rooms. It wasn't rage. It was coldness. The kind of cold that doesn't melt. Next morning, Caleb drove Clara to school. She didn't speak much on the ride, but before she got out she handed him something folded small, another drawing. This one was different. A tall tree, a swing, 2 figures beneath it. One was her. The other, taller, had dark lines around the hands like gloves, or maybe warmth. Above them, written in blocky, uneven letters, "If I fall, he catches." Caleb tucked the paper into his coat pocket and nodded. "You did good," he said. "Real brave." Clara looked up at him. "What happens when she comes back?" Caleb was quiet, then answered slow and certain, "This time we'll be ready." That night he reviewed more recordings. Bits and pieces, words thrown like stones, whispers carved with sharp edges. "Why do you always look at me like I'm not enough for you?" "Go ahead, draw your little ghosts. They're the only friends you've got. Don't act like you're scared of me. You came from me. You are me." And then one clip, barely 20 seconds long, changed everything. Evelyn's voice. "If anyone ever asks about those bruises again, you tell them you fell. Do you hear me?" Clara's voice trembling. "Yes." "Evelyn. Good girl. Now fix your face." Caleb sat motionless. Then, without hesitation, picked up his phone. Marcus answered after one ring. "You've got something, I've got everything." Caleb replied. "And I'm not waiting anymore." The next morning, Clara stood by the window, backpack on, safe in one arm, but this time she wasn't staring out with fear. She was watching the driveway, waiting for him. When Caleb arrived, she opened the door herself. No prompting, no coaxing. "I'm ready," she said. He smiled, crouched down. "Are you sure?" Clara nodded. "You said safe was protecting me. But now, I want to protect him too." He held out his hand. She took it, and in that quiet, simple act, no court order, no signature, no verdict. Caleb knew the tide had turned. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was choosing to stand, to trust, to speak even when the world wasn't listening. And Caleb, he wasn't just her driver. He was her witness, her wall, her lighthouse in the fog, and soon the world would hear her too, not through screams, but through truth, and a small gray rabbit that never stopped listening. The call came just after dusk. Marcus's voice on the line was steady, but his words were laced with gravity. "It's enough to open the door, but not enough to close it." Caleb was silent, pacing the length of his living room, a thumb tracing the edge of Clara's latest drawing, now pinned beside Ellie's old school picture on the fridge. He finally asked, "So what do we do?" "Wait, gather more, build the case like a staircase, one step at a time, and, in the meantime," Marcus didn't hesitate. "You keep her safe, even if it breaks you." Caleb hung up and stood in the quiet for a long moment. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one, bathing the sidewalk in amber. In the next room, Clara was curled on the couch, safe pressed to her chest. She wasn't asleep, just still. Sometimes Caleb thought silence wasn't a symptom of fear, it was the language of survival, and she had learned it fluently. He walked over and knelt beside her. "I'm going to tell you something," he said gently, "and you don't have to answer. Just listen." She turned her face toward him, eyes wide but focused. "When I was your age, I didn't cry either. Not because I wasn't sad, but because I didn't think anyone would listen." Clara blinked. Sometimes, he continued, we carry the pain of people who never learned how to lay theirs down. And they don't mean to pass it on, but they do, like a coat that's 2 sizes too big but still lands on your shoulders. Clara's lip quivered slightly. Then she whispered, "Is that what she's wearing?" "My mom." Caleb nodded slowly. "She's wearing her mother's pain. And it's tearing her apart from the inside out. Then why doesn't she take it off?" He paused, then said the truth, the kind that lands hard but clean. Because some people are more afraid of freedom than they are of pain. At least pain feels familiar. Clara looked down at Safe, held him tighter. "I don't want her coat," she said. "I know," Caleb whispered. "That's why you're the one who ends this." The next morning, Caleb sat at the edge of Evelyn's pristine office, staring across from a woman who looked nothing like the one in the mirror Clara had drawn. Evelyn was composed again. Back from her trip, hair immaculate, lipstick perfect, armor on. He'd asked for a private meeting. She agreed. "Let's not waste time," she said coolly. "I assume this is about Clara." "It's always been about Clara," Caleb replied. "You just keep making it about you." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. He continued, calm but piercing. "I'm not here to accuse. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to tell you the truth you've spent years running from." She tilted her head. "Which is that the little girl in your house is not your past." "She's my daughter," Evelyn snapped. "No," Caleb said. "She's a child, with her own story, her own voice, her own scars, and you're rewriting them with your ink." Silence stretched like wire between them. "I know what happened to you," Caleb added. "I've read the reports, talked to people who remember." Evelyn's mouth opened, then closed. He leaned forward. "You were a child, too. But no one stepped in. No one interrupted the pattern. Then softer I am." Evelyn's voice cracked for the first time. "She doesn't want me." She flinches. She hides. She looks at me like I'm the monster under the bed. Caleb didn't flinch. Then be the mother who drags the monster into the light and shows her it was fear, not you. Evelyn's breath trembled, and then came the question that exposed more than tears ever could. "Do you think I can still learn how to love Caleb?" Didn't answer with words. He just stood, walked to the window and opened it. The air outside was crisp, real, uncontrolled. Then he turned back to her. "Learning to love doesn't start with loving her," he said. "It starts with forgiving yourself." That afternoon, Clara asked if she could sleep in the guest room. "Why?" Caleb asked gently. "It feels safer. Less memories." He nodded. "Let's make some new ones then." He helped her choose a new nightlight, one that glowed soft yellow and looked like a small moon. They picked out new bedsheets ones with constellations. Later that evening, as Caleb tucked her in, Clara whispered, "Does starting over mean forgetting?" "No," he said. "It means remembering differently." She seemed to chew on that, then asked, "If I get brave tomorrow and talk to someone, will that help other kids too?" Caleb felt his chest swell quietly. It might Clara. It just might change everything. The next morning, Marcus delivered the final piece. A time-stamped video clip from the bunny camera. Evelyn, in a rare moment of visible unraveling, had crumbled on the edge of Clara's bed. "I'm sorry," she whispered through clenched teeth. "I don't know how to be soft. I only know how to survive. And I don't want you to learn that from me." Caleb watched the video twice. Not to find guilt, but to witness humanity. To see the mother behind the scars. And he saw her. Flawed, torn, but not absent. He sent the footage to Child Services, with a note. "There is harm here, but also hope. Proceed with wisdom." That evening, Evelyn returned home and found Clara sitting at the kitchen table drawing. The little girl looked up steady. "Mom?" she asked. Evelyn froze. Clara reached for safe and said quietly, "I want to believe you can change." Evelyn dropped to her knees. "I don't know how long it'll take," she whispered, "but I'll stay until it happens." Caleb watched from the doorway, and for the first time in weeks, no one flinched, no one hid, and silence. Silence finally became a space to grow inside, not something to escape from. Because sometimes breaking the cycle doesn't mean destroying the past. It means rewriting the future with one voice, one child, and one person brave enough to stay when it hurts. The next few days unfolded like a sunrise that dared to linger, slow, cautious, but unmistakably brighter. Clara started humming again. Not loudly, not often, but enough for Caleb to notice. Tiny melodies under her breath while brushing her hair or swinging her feet beneath the breakfast table. Sometimes just one or two notes before she caught herself as if testing the air to see if it was finally safe to make a sound. It was. Evelyn didn't scold, didn't flinch. She just listened. And one morning she hummed back. It wasn't in tune. It wasn't even a song. But it was a thread, and Clara, bless her brave little heart, took it. By Thursday, Caleb noticed a change in Evelyn, too. Not in how she dressed or walked, but in how she paused. She had started pausing, in conversation, before reacting, before raising her voice. It was subtle but telling, like someone learning how to breathe through the pain instead of letting it speak for them. One night after Clara had fallen asleep with Safe tucked into the curve of her neck, Evelyn approached Caleb in the hallway. "I found something," she said softly. "In my mother's things. After she died." Caleb nodded, letting her lead. They ended up in her study where Evelyn pulled out a thin weathered envelope yellowed at the corners unopened. I never had the courage to read it. Not until today. She handed it over. Caleb unfolded the letter carefully. It was handwritten in looping cursive, the ink slightly smudged in places as if someone had cried while writing it. Evelyn, I don't know if this will ever reach you. I've made more mistakes than I can count, and I know I taught you more fear than love. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do hope with all I have left that you break this curse. You don't have to become me. There is a softness in you. I saw it once when you held your breath to save a bird that had fallen from the window. Let that part grow, even if it hurts, especially when it hurts. Love Mom. Caleb looked up, eyes glassy. Evelyn's face was unreadable, but her voice cracked. I hated her for years, and all this time, she was begging me not to become her. Caleb set the letter down. Pain passed down becomes legacy. But pain faced becomes healing. She sat across from him, quiet for a long time. Then she asked, "Do you think I've done too much? Hurt Clara too deeply?" He shook his head slowly. Wounds that deep don't heal fast, but they remember who stayed and who didn't. That weekend, Clara had a visitor. It wasn't Evelyn's idea, it was Clara's. "My teacher from kindergarten," she explained. "The one who used to keep extra crayons for me, even the sparkly ones." Evelyn made the call. The woman arrived just before noon, a warm, silver-haired teacher named Miss Adele, who smiled like forgiveness. Clara ran to her. Not hid, not watched from the doorway. Ran. The teacher hugged her and said, "You've grown." Clara beamed. "And I've learned how to sleep with both eyes closed now." Miss Adele blinked back tears. "That's the bravest thing I've ever heard." Evelyn stood in the corner, unsure where to look. Then Miss Adele turned toward her. "I don't know what's happened here, but I know this children don't start humming again unless someone's been listening." Evelyn opened her mouth to reply, but nothing came. Instead, she nodded once, not out of pride, but out of humility. That night, as the house settled into its new rhythm, Caleb and Evelyn sat on the back porch sipping tea under the string lights Clara had insisted they put up together. "I'm not asking for anything," Evelyn said after a while. "Not praise, not permission, not even peace. I just want to be present." Caleb looked at her. Really looked. "You know," he said, "healing doesn't always look like progress. Sometimes it looks like staying at the table when everything in you wants to run." She met his gaze. "And sometimes," she said, "it looks like handing someone the letter you were too afraid to read alone." They sat there in silence, broken only by the sound of wind and a child's laughter drifting through an open window. Later that night, Clara called out softly. Caleb entered her room. She was wide awake, Safe in one arm, the other hand fiddling with the edge of her pillow. "Can I tell you something?" "Anything," he said. "I don't think I'm scared of bedtime anymore." He smiled. "Why not?" "Because now, when the dark comes, I don't feel alone in it." She paused, then added with a sleepy yawn, "You and Safe are louder than the quiet now." Caleb kissed her forehead gently. Then she said the thing that undid him completely. "I don't know what love sounds like, but I think it might sound like staying." He didn't speak. He just sat there, one hand on her back, the other over his own heart, holding in everything that threatened to break loose. Down the hall, Evelyn opened her journal. On a fresh page she wrote, "Tonight my daughter laughed in her sleep. That's the sound of a cycle breaking. Not with violence, not with shouting, but with presence, and tea on porches, and bunnies with stitched hearts. I am not my mother, but I am her lesson. And maybe, just maybe, I'm finally ready to pass along something better." She closed the book, exhaled, and for the first time since Clara was born, she didn't feel afraid of tomorrow, because tomorrow wasn't just another day to survive. It was a day to begin. The morning of the court hearing was colder than expected. The sky was overcast, blank as paper. No sun, no songbirds, just the kind of silence that made your breath sound louder than usual. Clara held Caleb's hand tightly as they approached the courthouse steps, Safe tucked firmly under her arm like a sentinel. Evelyn walked beside them a few steps behind, not because she had to, but because she chose to. Her heels were low today. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No designer suit, no cold veneer, just a woman in a soft navy coat showing up for her daughter. They were three people walking toward a future none of them could fully predict. But something had shifted. They all felt it. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was a bridge. Inside the courtroom felt less like a battlefield and more like a room full of mirrors. Everyone saw themselves reflected in every word spoken, every mistake, every triumph, every silence, every scar. Caleb testified first. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled when he held up Clara's drawings. He didn't say Evelyn's name in anger. He didn't accuse. He told the truth, but with compassion. "She's not evil," he said. "She's injured, but she's showing up. And sometimes that's the start of everything." Then came Evelyn. She stood before the judge and read from a folded letter, her own words this time. "I wasn't taught how to mother. I was taught how to endure. I was raised on silence and survival. And for a long time I passed that on because I didn't know how not to. But I've seen what love looks like. It looks like a man who didn't have to stay but did. A child who still reaches out even after being pushed away. And a bunny stitched back together because someone believed broken things are worth saving. I'm not asking to win. I'm asking to try, because I want to become the kind of mother Clara deserves. And maybe one day, the kind she's proud to call hers." The courtroom was still. Even the judge leaned back slowly like the air had shifted weight. Then it was Clara's turn to speak. She stood on a little step stool, tiny hands gripping the edge of the wood railing. The judge leaned in. "Is there anything you'd like to say?" Sweetheart Clara looked at Caleb, then at Evelyn. Then she said with clarity only children seem to possess, "I want to live with both of them. Because one knows how to listen, and the other is learning." The judge took a long breath, then smiled gently. And with that, the decision was made. Joint guardianship, counseling support, a family plan. Not perfect, but full of possibility. And possibility is where hope lives. 3 weeks later, the garden was full of life. Spring had arrived in the smallest of ways, new buds, softer breezes, and the sound of laughter echoing through the Mercer estate for the first time in years. Clara was barefoot in the grass, chasing bubbles Caleb blew from the porch. She ran in circles, giggling wildly, Safe flying from her arm like a flag. Evelyn watched from a few steps away, watering the daffodils. Her hands, once known only for firm handshakes and precise keystrokes, were now learning how to hold gentleness. "Do you ever think," she asked Caleb as he came to stand beside her, "that maybe the hardest part of love isn't giving it, but believing we deserve it?" Caleb glanced toward Clara, still spinning in the yard. "No," he said. "I think the hardest part is staying long enough to see it grow." She looked at him. "And thank God you did." He didn't reply with words. He just smiled and handed her the bubble wand. "You try." Evelyn raised a brow. "I don't do bubbles." "Neither did I," he said, "until someone reminded me what it feels like to laugh without fear." She dipped the wand, blew gently, and watched as a single shimmering bubble floated toward the sky, fragile, bright, and brief, and yet undeniably beautiful. Clara chased it, caught it, and whispered, "I'll name this one tomorrow." That evening, Clara curled up in bed between them, something they'd started allowing on weekends. Safe rested between her and Evelyn, a silent peace treaty. "Do you know what I wished for today?" Clara murmured. "What Caleb asked, that nothing ever goes back to how it was before, even if we mess up sometimes." Evelyn leaned in, voice soft. "We will. Mess up, I mean. But now, we clean it up together." Caleb added, "That's what family means. Not never hurting each other, just never walking away." Clara yawned. "Good, then I'm keeping you both." And just like that, the night settled in around them, warm and honest. Months later, Clara's school hosted a spring showcase. Parents were invited to come see what their children had been working on. When Clara stepped on stage with her class to read a short story she'd written, Evelyn gripped Caleb's hand tighter than she meant to. Clara took the mic. "This is a story about a bunny named Safe who thought he was just a toy. But one day he realized something special, that he was the heart of a whole new beginning. Because love doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to stay." The room erupted in applause. Caleb had tears in his eyes. Evelyn did too, and Clara smiled wider than the sun, because now she knew what love sounded like. It sounded like two chairs always pulled up at the dinner table. It sounded like someone humming back. It sounded like staying. And it felt like home. And that was the story of a little girl, a broken bunny, and the power of choosing to stay. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from, and what part of this story spoke to your heart the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of the quiet strength in love and healing, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next one. We share a new story every single day. Stories that matter, that heal, and that remind us what it means to be human. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, take care of each other, and remember, sometimes staying is the greatest act of love there is.